Hi, Jessica. Oh, what happened? Happened to my Zoom?
Hello.
There, how are you?
Good. Am I the only one again?
So far, I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. How's your day?
It's going well.
Sweet.
The days just seem to be flying by here.
Right? The whole week.
How's your week going?
Good. It's been busy. Lots of classes, trying to get my clock hours done.
Good.
Get it out of the way so you don't have to spend the rest of the year worrying about it.
It feels good to check those off, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I will keep an eye on the waiting room here. I'm going to turn my phone off. And we will get to work.
Sounds
Oh,
good.
they're talking right outside my door. It's kind of distracting. They'll go away soon, I hope. So today is all about inspections. And so this is part 4 of the 4-part series. Have you done it? Will this be the last one for you, or are you still needing more?
I'm honestly not sure because it was like 6 months ago when I took the other one. So I was gonna see you again the next 2 weeks just to make
Oh,
sure.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you have not taken part 2 of purchase and sale, I'm repeating that next Wednesday because the second Wednesday of the month I was out of town.
Mm.
So I'm gonna do that segment, makeup class on the 30th, since we've got 5
Okay.
Wednesdays this month. So a week from today, I will do part 2 of purchase and sale,
Perfect. Sounds good.
just so you know.
Thank you.
And oh, I don't know who this guy is. Obviously, he does beer ads. I don't know. Can you see my meme?
Yeah.
I just make sure when you don't put anybody in your car, don't show properties until you've got that pre-approval letter from a lender.
Yeah. And even then, I keep being advised to not put people in my car anymore and just meet people at the properties for safety reasons.
I think a lot of people have converted to that.
Yeah.
If it's somebody from
Right.
a relative, something like that, that's one thing. But, you know, I found that even before COVID and everything, um, it just got to be where it was, unless you were like showing them around an area or something, it just seemed like a lot of times with a couple, they'd both be coming from different locations and I'd be coming from a third location and we'd end up just meeting at the house and kind of caravanning to see, the rest of the properties. And
Right.
then everybody peeled off to go their own separate ways. So, it's whatever feels right to you, but I think I would always err on the side of caution and,
Yeah.
you know, I support that concept of not taking people around in your car. It's also, I found it was hard to talk, navigate and drive, right? So
Okay.
I could do 2 out of 3, but to do all 3, to be keeping an eye on my phone and driving and watching, um, watching traffic and whatever was, that was a challenge, so it's a
Definitely.
little more, I don't know, peaceful.
Yeah,
Just to be driving on your own and then you have a minute to think about things.
for sure.
And you can always, grab a coffee or a meal or something with your client after the showings if you want to discuss them. You don't have to
Exactly.
do that in the car.
Very true.
So today we're going to be talking about inspection forms, and we're going to talk about the inspection forms and the process. And we're going to focus on 35, which is right here, the inspection addendum. And this really should be used in virtually every home purchase. It should always be recommended to a client. The only alternative is to use a waiver of the inspection, and that is 35W. So you have to have one or the other in every residential purchase transaction. The reason being that this first paragraph here, waiver of inspection, it gives very clear indemnification language saying, hey, we advised the buyer to get an inspection and they decided not to. But this protects us and the firm. And I only had people, before we had this form, and it's only a few years old, I would actually, if I had somebody waive an inspection, I'd actually write an addendum saying that I had advised them to get an inspection and they had decided against it. It was a little more involved than that, but
Yeah.
that way I, could rest assured that nothing was going to come back to haunt me if they had some post-closing problem. Hey, the roof is shot, or oh, now I have to replace all the plumbing or something. Why didn't you tell me to get an inspection? So if you don't have anything in writing, it's tough to prove that you delivered that advice. So anyway,
Right.
I'm glad to have this form because it's very important to protect us. There's also a paragraph here that allows for the notification of a pre-inspection being conducted before mutual, and any modifications or repairs that the buyer wants as a result of that pre-inspection, and stipulates to how those need to be accomplished. And then it also gives a little warning about septic system. Septic system is an on-site sewage disposal system. And if you have a septic system, then you need a different inspection form for that, along with wells has a different inspection form. They're very similar in format and in the process, the back and forth process of negotiating any repairs or replacements that need to be done as a result, or that the buyer wants done as a result of that inspection. But we'll go over those forms as well.
Awesome. Good to know.
So one or the other you must have. So the reason this is in this addendum, this contingency is so great is it's a subjective contingency, and it says right here in the first paragraph. I don't know why that's formatted that way. And what does that mean, subjective satisfaction? Well, it just means the buyer can just say, hey, I don't like what I found out on the inspection. I want out of the deal and I want my earnest money back. And that's all they have to do is check a box on the response form and exit the transaction. And this inspection response form is 35R. Think of R for response. So right here, the first paragraph gives the options for the buyer's response. We can approve it, and then the contingency is satisfied. Seller doesn't have to sign off on anything. It's just you go on to closing. The next box is what I was talking about, where they say, I disapprove the inspection, I'm terminating, and my earnest money comes back to me. Then they can also here ask for additional inspections, ask for specific modifications, repairs, or replacements in the following paragraph. And we'll go over this whole back and forth form as we get into Form 35. But I want to remind you too that as a broker, if you have a buyer that disapproves an inspection, there's no contractual right or no legal right for the seller to have any further explanation. The buyer doesn't have to say, oh, I don't like the fact that the roof is gonna have to be replaced in 5 years, or I don't like the fact that all the windows need to be redone, or whatever it is. They don't have to specify. They can just say, I'm out. And as their agent, as their broker, you also are not obligated in any way to provide any specific information about the buyer's reaction or decision to terminate the inspection based on the results that they received. So just be real careful. A lot of times, listing agent will say, well, wait a minute, we thought the property was in great shape. Why is the buyer backing out? You don't answer that. You just say, hey, I'm really sorry this didn't work out. Best of luck to you and your seller, that's it. Keep it professional, cordial, don't provide any details. That can really open a dialogue that is inappropriate at best, and it can cause problems for you and your buyer. So if they want out, they can do that. So that's what makes it so strong, is they don't have to submit any other documentation or bids or additional inspections, or they don't have to prove anything to the seller. They can just say, I don't like it and I want out. So that's what makes it such a powerful contingency for the buyer. Now, this first paragraph recites the possible inspections that the buyer can do. Structural, mechanical, general condition of the improvements, compliance with building and zoning codes, hazardous materials, pest, soil stability. The buyer's home inspection must be performed either by the buyer or a licensed inspector. And you can always look up people's license status on the DOL website if you need to. While we're talking about inspectors, anytime you have an inspection on a property, you must include this Form 41D, think of D for disclosure. And this is required by Washington state law. If you refer a home inspector to a client, you need to have this form in your file. And you need to have 3 different inspectors. If you don't have somebody that you're working with already, you can ask any other agent in the office. There are, you can ask me, you can ask a team leader. And as your business gets rolling, you will develop relationships with these service providers like escrow people, inspectors. You'll probably have a list of people like handymen and yard maintenance people and window washers and house cleaners, all that kind of thing. The reason for the law requiring this is that the state wants to make sure that you're not referring somebody to your client that you are related to, or a company or a business that you have a financial interest in. If you do, you must disclose that. Now, most of the time, you're just going to say nature of relationship with broker. I've referred them to other clients in the past, or they have worked with other brokers in my firm, or something like that, right? But you do need to list 3 different inspectors and describe your relationship. And then you write in the name of the firm, Keller Williams Realty Puget Sound, and sign and date it, and your buyer has to sign it, and that needs to go in your transaction folder, your file in command. I keep hitting the button on my desk. Okay, back to 35. Now on 1A, I would counsel you to always check May on this. I would always want to be able to do a sewer inspection. And this is a matter of hiring a company that does sewer line scoping. And I honestly don't know the cost. Have you had one of these done ever?
No, I have not.
Okay. And this is, I used to always tell people, if it's an older home, be sure and do this, but I have also heard stories about newer construction that had some kind of an obstruction in the sewer line that caused a problem. So I would advise my buyer to always have their sewer line scoped. And you might say, well, wait a minute, wouldn't that, belong to the company that, provides the service, Well, remember that there is a line running down, usually running down like the middle of the street, under everything, that takes all the sewage to the sewage treatment plant, right? But there is a side sewer line that runs from that main pipe to each of the houses on the street. And that side sewer line is what you want to have scoped, because maintenance of that sewer line is the owner's responsibility. So if that has degraded over time, the material's degraded, maybe there's a crack and a tree root has invaded that and has created a blockage or a potential, there's a potential problem there. Of course, they would never know unless all of a sudden their system backs up, which, as you might imagine, can be a horrible mess. Because it would back up into toilets and sinks and bathtubs, anything connected to that egress line where water and sewage is going out. So if that is done, then usually the inspector has to take the toilet out to run their scope down, and they are obligated to replace it, make everything nice and tidy just the way they found it. And that is true for any of the inspection items. It's listed here in the next paragraph, paragraph 2, that the buyer gets to choose the inspector. So it's not the seller picking, it's the buyer. And the buyer has to pay for it, and they can't alter the property or improvements on the property. So they can't dig a big hole in the yard, and they can't take down a bunch of drywall or something to look and see what's behind it, unless they have the seller's permission. And they should restore the property to the same condition they were in prior to the inspection. If anything does get damaged, then the buyer would be responsible for that. And those are the buyer's obligations in paragraph 2. Now, this next paragraph is critical because it establishes a timeline for the inspection and the inspection response. So there's a default of 10 days listed here on line 22. In some cases, this is enough time, and others it might not be enough. The computation of time does include counting holidays and weekends when it's over 5 days. So the 10-day period would count holiday and weekend. So a lot of inspectors don't work, holidays or Sundays. A lot of them do work Saturday, but that really lessens the time that you've got to not only get the inspection done, but get the report, evaluate it with your buyer, decide what they're going to ask for, and then get your Form 30, your response form completed and delivered to the seller. I've had a couple times in the last, year or so where I've had new brokers who thought that their responsibility in this time frame was just to have the inspection done. And yes, you do have to have the inspection done within the time frame, but the time frame also, within that time frame, you've got to deliver the response to the buyer within that time. This 35R, the response time. So it's not just the inspection, it's all the other things, talking it over, getting the report, talking it over with your buyer. Maybe they will want another inspection, a specialist inspection, like, oh, the original inspector found I don't know, a wasp's nest in the attic. Well, maybe you want a pest inspector to come out, or maybe there's evidence of mice in the crawl space and you want a pest inspector to come out. So you can request additional time for additional inspections, but if you, within that initial time frame, the buyer can have all the different kinds of inspections they want. So, if your inspection time frame is encompassing a holiday like Thanksgiving or 4th of July or Christmas, so especially those, Thanksgiving, Christmas, where people are taking multiple days off around the holidays, you might need to give your buyer a little more time. On the flip side of the coin, as with any contingency, if you can tighten up the time frame, that makes your offer more attractive to a seller. So it's kind of walking a tightrope. You want to give your buyer enough time, but you also want to make your offer really attractive to the seller. So 10 days is a good default. If you've got a house that kind of a fixer, or it's, really old, you might want to ask for a couple extra days. And it's something you need to talk over with your buyer to get a reasonable amount of time. Part of this depends on if they want to attend the inspection and how available they are too. So can they, are they going to be immediately available to review and discuss the inspection report when it comes out? Or are they going to be, in Chicago on a business trip? So that's something to talk over with them when you're filling out this form. So again, this lists here the options that are on 35R. We're still in paragraph 3 here. Starting with line 23, that the buyer can either say, I'm approving the inspection, and waiving the contingency because everything looks great, it's a complete remodel, studs out, fabulous. Or I'm disapproving the inspection and terminating. Or I want additional inspection, or here are the repairs I want made. And if the buyer does disapprove and terminate, then the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. So let me find if I can find 50. So if you did disapprove your inspection and ask for the earnest money back, you would need to accompany your, oh, didn't I load form 50? Your inspection response form with a form 50. And I think we looked at this last time when we were talking about exercising the financing contingency, right? So again, this is not if you utilize a 35R, the inspection is disapproved here on line 7, then you do need to have the buyer sign it, and then you would accompany that with the authorization to disperse earnest money. And here you would, reference your purchase and sale information, and then you'd put the dollar amount of the earnest money in the first line. You and your buyer sign it, and then you would send that along with the 35R over to the listing agent as soon as possible. And the reason, just like what we talked about for the financing contingency, the contract does stipulate to the buyer's contractual right to get their earnest money back, but escrow has to have mutually agreed upon instructions from the buyer and the seller before they release the funds. Any questions on that?
Following along, doing
You
good.
got it. Okay, great. And the timelines in 35R are ruled by this Form 35, so that's why it's important to kind of go through it line by line. The next section is about providing or not providing the inspection report to the seller. And this could also be, paragraph 4 could also be known as how to accidentally waive your buyer's contingency report. And what it boils down to is you can't provide the inspection report, any part of the inspection report, or the inspector's recommendation unless you have written permission from the seller to receive those items. And this is one of the rare protections in the purchase and sale for the seller. I mean, basically all the contingencies that we attach, they're for the protection of the buyer. But this protects the seller from, well, I think that the simplest way to explain it is, an inspection is one person's opinion of a property on a given day. And what one inspector says might not be what another inspector says. And some inspectors are going to give such, they might include their opinions on a property, like something like water heater nearing end of life should be replaced. Now, water heaters can last anywhere from 10 to, I don't know, I've heard of 17, 18, even 20 years. So say you've got a hot water heater that's 7 years old and it's working just fine. And you've got an inspector who writes on their inspection report that it should be replaced. Well, the buyer's going to say, oh, I want the seller to replace it. And then the seller says, well, it's working fine. It's only 7 years old. And historically, this model lasts 15 years. You see, it becomes a point of contention. So it also, if a seller gets an inspection report that has notice of a material defect, then they have constructive knowledge of that defect and they're legally obligated to disclose it to any other potential buyer. So that it's a protection for the seller. So you might say, well, when I'm filling out this purchase and sale, how do I know what to check for the seller? Well, you don't. And usually you don't, as the buyer's agent, you don't fill this out. And even normally when a seller's reviewing this, the inspection hasn't been done. They don't check these boxes. So this just puts you on notice that this is what the seller, one way that the seller would have. If at the get-go they say, hey, if the buyer wants to have an inspection, I want to see a copy of the report. If they're firm about that, then they can check that box, and this does not constitute a counter offer. So it wouldn't be something then that the buyer would have to sign off on. But more typically, you get the inspection done and you say, we want to have the flashing around the chimney on the roof replaced. And the seller comes back and says, well, I would like to see the portion of the inspection report that shows the, photos of that flashing, because I'm, 72 and I'm not going to climb up on my roof to look for myself. So I would like to see the detailed notes and the photos from the inspection report for that, so I can evaluate if that's something that I can, that's a request I can fill for the buyer. So in that case, if they say, okay, we got your 35R, you want that flashing redone, we want the portion of the inspection report around that. You can say, sure, as soon as I get that consent form from the seller, and that is 35C, here it is. And you can see that they've just snipped out that portion of the 35 and put it on a separate addendum. So this is where the seller would check the box where they want the inspection report, the portion related to the requested repairs, or a copy of the inspector's recommendation for additional inspections. And if you send any of these items over to the seller without having this written, this signed request form, request and consent form from the seller, then you have waived your buyer's contingency. And we've had a couple instances of those too, where um, you know, you're lucky in a way because you don't have to unlearn other things. So when I started out, it was really not just commonplace, but it was really the way you did things on an inspection was if you made any requests for repairs or replacements, you attached the inspector's recommendation and the portions of the inspection report that related to the request to back up your request. So instead of just saying, hey, we want the flashing on the roof repaired, we want the flashing on the roof replaced, and here's a picture of everything, and here's what the inspector said about it. And at that time, it was thought, well, we're strengthening our request by actually proving that there's something wrong with this item and it needs to be repaired or replaced. Well, no, you can still do that as long as you've got this signed form in your file. So those are, and remember too that when you are making requests for repairs or modifications, use this form. Do not just send them in an email. Do not use a blank addendum. I've had new brokers do both those things. And don't miss your deadline. If you do, even if you just send it, say it's due at 9 p.m. on Thursday, you send it at 7 a.m. on Friday, you've missed your deadline. And the seller has no contractual obligation to do any repairs or consider any of the requests. So be really careful about that, about counting out your days for your inspection time frame. Because again, it's not just to get the inspection done in that time, but it's to get the response form over as well. And remember that when you're dealing with these deadlines, except for possession, a deadline cannot expire on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. So if you're counting out a deadline for say 10 days, say you go into mutual today, and you say, oh, we're going to have our inspection done in 10 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That would put us at Saturday, November 2nd is our 10th day. Well, and a deadline can't expire on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, so you would have until the 4th.
That's what I was gonna ask. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
Okay. And in fact, I just saw this on I read the legal hotline updates because they have the Washington Association of Realtors keeps a database of all the questions that go into the legal hotline, and they update it each week with Q&A, Q&As that have come through. And that was a question this week. It was about when does the deadline expire? You know, one of
I
the
actually took a class this morning, the core at SKCAR, whatever. And I was the only one to get it right for the 10-day, because he said if you close on the 18th of November, or if inspection is the 18th of November, how long do you have? And everybody was saying like,
the 20
but it's a holiday in between, so it took it out to the 2nd of
right, because the 28th would be Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so I got that right, and there was
Oh,
like
right on. Oh, good
49 other
job.
people in the class.
Oh, good job. Oh,
Thank you.
I'm happy to hear that. That's awesome. Okay, so you got that one down.
Yes.
That's so good. So remember that buyer can not only ask for a repair, a modification, a replacement of something. I want you to replace that dishwasher, it's rusted out or whatever. But they can also ask for another form of not compensation, but they can say, we want $5,000 credit at closing, so we can replace the carpet, something like that. That probably isn't enough money. It's a small area. Just the stairs, all the stairs need to be replaced, the carpet needs to be replaced. Or they can ask for a reduction in purchase price. And I would consider that last option the least desirable, honestly, because although lenders are not going to order the appraisal, which the buyer has to pay for, and it's, I don't know, easily $800, I think now. But they've already, they're working their loan processing timeline. And if you change the sales price, it might add some more time onto that loan processing time. So before you ask for that, you would want to check with the lender and say, we're looking at asking for either a credit or a reduction in the sales price to cover replacing all the flooring in the house. It's going to be $15,000. The listing agent says the seller doesn't have the money to do that up front. So what would be best for the buyer? How can we handle this for the buyer? Now, if they've got closing costs that are $15,000 or more, and all of that money can be applied toward closing costs, awesome, that's great. But if they don't need that much for closing costs, or it's not all allowed by the lender, then maybe a reduction in sales price is the best thing for the buyer. But that's definitely a conversation between the buyer or you and the lender to see what's going to be the best for the buyer. And then we already talked about this paragraph here. So let's move on to additional time for inspections. So if an inspector does recommend it, buyer gets additional time to have specialist inspections like we talked about before at their option and expense. But buyer needs to tell the seller about that before the end of the initial inspection period, not after. And after the buyer gives that notice, they've got 5 days to obtain those additional inspections, and that it can be more, it can be less, just like the inspection period. So the default is 5 days. But remember, I don't like blanks in contracts, so always fill it in.
Definitely.
Even if it's the default amount. Most people are honest, but sometimes you have a listing agent that goes through. If you don't write anything in, they might write in 2 days. And if you don't catch it when you get that seller signed document back, then you're in trouble. You've got
That
a
would
real
be so
short
shaky.
time frame. Yeah. So now this next section is important because it details out the timeframes for the back and forth negotiations between the buyer and seller if the buyer is requested for repair or modification. So remember, the buyer has 10 days to do their response, and now the seller, this next paragraph says, the seller's got 3 days to respond to the buyer's request. And the seller can say, sure, I'll do everything, or I'll do some of it, I'll do none of it, or I'll do something else. Maybe they say, we want the roof replaced. and the seller says, well, I will have it cleaned and treated and give you a 5-year roof certification. Something different. If the seller says, yes, I'll do everything you asked for, I'll replace that flashing for you, then you're done. Your contingency is satisfied and no further reply from the buyer is necessary. But if the seller doesn't agree to do everything that the buyer asked for, then after getting that response to the buyer's request from the seller, then the buyer has, guess what, 3 days again to reply. So if the seller says, I'm not going to replace all the carpet, but I will give you a $7,500 credit at closing. Well, then the buyer has 3 days to talk to the lender. Can I use that for my closing cost? Do we need to change the sales price? What are we going to do? Figure that out. And then they've got 3 days to respond, reply to the seller's response. And if they say, great, I take that $7,500, then again, the process is complete and no further reply from the seller is necessary. And at this point, you're done. These periods of time don't repeat. And you've got to get to an agreement between the parties after this back and forth. Really important that during the buyers, both during their initial inspection period, that you're getting that inspection done and that 35 are prepared, and also during the buyer's reply period, that you are working on formulating that reply, which will probably necessitate a conversation with the buyer's lender as well as the buyer. So if you let that go by, then your contingency expires. So you've got to get to an agreement. So right here it says, buyer's inaction shall result in waiver of this inspection, in which case seller is not obligated to make any repairs and the contingency is waived. So you're on a tight timeline. So repairs, if the seller agrees to make the repairs, then they should be accomplished, of course, at the seller's response in a commercially reasonable manner and lawfully, no later than 3 days prior to the closing date. Personally, I like to do it 5 days prior to closing date, and that gives you a little more time in case something isn't done right. I would always ask my inspector when I hired, usually you're going to be the one calling and scheduling the inspector, right? And saying, hey, if we need a re-inspect, what do you charge for that? So that you can prepare your buyer for that expense. And it's not just, I don't know, like, oh, there's a new dishwasher and, we can run it, see if it's okay. Or, oh, they replaced the faucet in the powder room. Sometimes, and I've had this happen to me personally where I had a faucet replaced and they hooked the hot and cold up backwards. That also happened to me when I had a washing machine hooked up. They hooked up the hot and cold backwards because I usually wash on cold water. Detergent's formulated now to work in cold water. And everything was getting washed in hot water and I couldn't figure out why this was happening. And then I realized, oh my gosh, they hooked it up. They hooked the lines up reverse, so everything was getting washed in hot water. So anyway, little things like that, but there are also, the issues of things maybe in the crawl space or in the attic, or you want to have a professional make sure that if you've had an electrical panel replaced or you've had a hot water tank replaced or whatever it is, it's good to have the re-inspection and make sure that it was done properly. Maybe you have a new fan put into the master bedroom. You want somebody to go up and make sure that that is venting out properly. That seems to be kind of common, even in new construction where maybe something isn't hooked up at all. It's just one of those last minute details that doesn't get done. So do recommend a re-inspect 5 days prior to closing by the inspector or specialist who recommended the repair. But do find, make sure you've got an idea of the cost, so you can say to the buyer, okay, the inspection is going to be 400, and if we need to re-inspect, it's going to be another 150. So you should be budgeting 550 for this process. And if you have a client that says, wow, well, it looks fine to me, I don't know why I should spend that. I would always say, hey, you're spending $500,000 on this house. I think it's worth 550 to find out exactly what's going on with the systems of the house. And even if you're not going to ask the seller to repair and replace every little thing, and by the way, I don't recommend you ask for, every little thing. Because if you present a list of 40 things to your seller, they're gonna throw up their hands in disgust, and you still got the appraisal hurdle to clear, right? So anyway, it's worth it not just to know the things that need to be repaired or replaced, negotiate with the seller to get those done prior to closing, so the house can be safely and occupied. But also to budget for any future repairs. Oh, you've got 5 years left on your roof. You've got, a few more years on the hot water heater. Some of those expenses, if you know about it in advance as a homeowner, you can budget for that instead of coming up to oh my gosh, I've got to come up with, $14,000 for a roof. I didn't even know it was, getting old. Really good information to have for a homeowner. I would never have my buyer pay for any repairs or replacements before closing. It's just a lot of risk for the buyer if anything goes wrong with their loan, or what if somebody loses their job, or what if one of the sellers dies, and then you've got the property's going to probate, and it's going to be 3-4 more months until it's going to be available again, and the buyer doesn't want to wait for that property. If they've paid for something that's on the property that they don't own, too bad, so sad. If they insist on doing that, you must advise them in a provable way to consult an attorney. And by provable way, I mean an email that you can save to your command file, or you can text them if you know how to save your texts as well. But don't leave it to just a phone conversation. I remember having a big, well, it was an argument. I mean, I hate to say I argued with a client, but I did because he wanted, it wasn't a repair thing, but he wanted to start moving in his appliances to the garage of the house before we actually closed. And I was like, oh, that is not a good idea. He was like, well, it would be more convenient for me to have these things delivered, before closing, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what if something happens, what if you get there on moving day and those things have disappeared? You have no legal right to put anything on the property. And even if you'd say, well, I can get the seller to agree to it. Well, or you should. I said, well, they might agree to it, but the liability to you is great. What if you put some things in the garage and then they accidentally get hit by a car, by the seller's car, or they actually accidentally get taken by the seller's movers, or you can see how that scenario would be very dangerous. So try not to let them do that. The next paragraph is about oil storage tanks. Those inspections just are to determine if they are or are not on the property. If there is one on the property, make sure that you get the decommissioning documents from the seller that will state that, it's all been treated to avoid any contamination. of the soil, from any remaining leaking oil. Usually they're emptied out and it's all treated. And that would be a much older home. The next paragraph says, if you've got a septic system on this property, buyer, you should have a separate inspection of that system. And we'll talk about that. And then finally, the neighborhood review contingency. You can, why not? You can check that box. That gives your buyer a few days to look around the neighborhood. If they absolutely don't need it, fine. This is commonly used if you've got people, maybe you've got corporate transferees, you've got people in the armed service, maybe somebody's coming in due to report to JBLM. Maybe only one of them went out shopping with you, and this gives them a chance to look around the neighborhood with their spouse and make sure that it is everything that they want. So it's just another protection for your buyer, gives them a few extra days. People often use this time to verify the school district their kids are going to be attending. Maybe also look at what's the commute going to look like on a Monday morning versus when I saw the property on Saturday afternoon or, Sunday night. Okay, I think it's a good time for a break. You ready?
Sounds good.
Okay, let's take a break till 10 after 3. So I'll see you then.
Perfect. Have a good break.
Thanks, you too. Oh, hi there.
Hello.
I'm
Took a
back.
little nap there.
What?
Took a little nap there.
Oh, a little power nap?
Yeah.
Sweet. Oh, I returned some calls. That's all I did.
Nice.
Okay, here's the ups and downs of a day in the life of a realtor.
Isn't that true?
I hadn't seen this one. I'm always looking for good memes. And I thought this was very, uh, yeah, just what you said. Very true.
Relatable.
I will say that it's a mental discipline not to keep going on that downward slope,
Yeah.
but to be resolved to reach your goals and, get those tools in place like, 411, you're planning, where you take your big goal and then you break it down all the way, all the way down from yearly to quarterly to monthly, all the way down to how many calls do I need to make today?
Mm-hmm.
Were you at the meeting last Tuesday or 2 days? Oh, yesterday. It was only yesterday. It seems like it was 2 days ago.
I
You
was
were you at the team meeting, the business meeting?
no, I went and I took a class, the open house mastery in Canada.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great class. Well, one thing that Edgar shared at the meeting in Federal Way was he talked about the fact that one one thing that they had instituted on their team was to do one-on-one meetings with their clients. And he said, there's breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, and he said that, if you do those with your clients, that's more meaningful to them than getting, 50 emails or,
Yeah.
whatever. He said, what they have found is by taking the time to meet with their clients, share a meal, and, can be like people you don't know too well, maybe that's breakfast. Um,
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah, and then of course your A clients are gonna refer you to other people and have used you before, that's a dinner client, right?
Yeah.
But he said if you can do that with people once a year, even, it could be more. But at least once a year, he said, we found that, maybe you have a couple dinners with somebody and you get several pieces of business from those contacts. And he said it's well worth the time and the money for the meal to get that kind of referral business,
Yeah, we're all gonna pay to eat anyway.
yeah, and you have to eat anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's just coming back to basics about how this business is really a relationship business. And I thought that was such a succinct way to, say, here's a different way to market, or here's a way to build your business into a referral business. It's just like you want a relationship with these people, then just like with any, a friend or a family member or anybody in your life, you have to spend the time, make the time for them. And maybe it's not always convenient. I mean, your friends and family don't need you at convenient times, right? But if you can do that, it really will work. And I think what I found when, there's a lot of this call reluctance and all that stuff. And so, and I had it too, but I found that if I did it around events, whether it was holiday or a seasonal change or an event in the client's life, oh, your daughter's graduating, you guys are going to be empty nesters. How are you doing? Maybe send them a book on, adjusting to life as an empty nester or something, you know, they were glad to hear from you. Oh, hey, yeah, we're doing great. You know, we're gonna be driving over to Utah to take her to school in a couple months, you know, to
Mhm.
have it more, I was much more comfortable with connecting with them on a personal level, then I wasn't the person who'd call up and say, oh, hi, remember I sold you your house, you know, last year, and if you have anybody that you can, that wants to buy, sell, or invest in real estate, can you, share my information with them? That was hard. That was a hard conversation for me to make. But if I could call up and say, um, hey, I'm, just checking to see how everything's going at the house. Do you guys have any great vacation plans this summer? You're gonna go camping at, Deception Pass like you usually do, and, you know, what's going on in your neighborhood, and, do it that way. That was just so much more comfortable for me. And I
Totally.
think, it's more meaningful to the client. And I've been on the other side of the table many times. I moved around a lot when I was married for my husband's job. And some of the realtors I had were great and some weren't so great. And um, I remember thinking one of the first few times that we bought and sold, I thought, it's like the realtor becomes your best friend, for a few weeks or a month or whatever. And then you never hear from them again. It was kind of odd,
Yeah.
because this is a huge part of your life, either buying a home or selling a home, hundreds of thousands of dollars, lots, some emotion involved. And you do get close, to people that are helping you through those transactions. So anyway, I guess that's my sermon for the day or something. But
So
anyway, that I
yeah,
thought
make that reminder. I need
but
that reminder, because we all start to sound like broken records and going out like anybody buying and selling real estate, rather than just doing those personable check-ins and having some regular conversation. So
yeah, and what I discovered was that if I did it in a way that was comfortable to me, and from a personal, connection, then they were always really glad to hear from me,
mhm, mhm.
and wouldn't you be glad to hear from somebody that, that had provided a service to you and then called you up and just like, well, how are you doing? Are you free for coffee? I'd like to just catch up a little bit, see how you guys are. It's not a hard sell thing. It's just, how's your life? And then they say, well, how is your business? And then you can tell them that, well, interest rates have, are still holding firm, but we're still finding opportunities for clients in the market, and I
Yeah,
love my job and I love helping people find the right place, just like I did with you guys, and chitty
yeah,
chat. That it's fun. It is fun. And I think that's a component to a lot of really good salespeople, is that they are very personable, they are um very outgoing, good communicators. And that makes for a very easy social interaction.
yeah.
And the other thing I like, finally, about that whole concept that Edgar told about, was that most of your clients are going to be breakfast and lunch. So
Mhm.
it's not like everybody's going to be a big fancy dinner that's going to take a whole night and cost,
Right.
$200 or something. You can meet them at, where, I remember that you really liked pancakes. Why don't we go to IHOP and have a pancake? You know, are you free on Friday, before, at 8 and, or whatever. Um, I thought, well, that's something that's really doable, because it's a, lunch or coffee. Then you could say, I've got an hour on Thursday. I'd love to catch up with you. Why don't we meet at that coffee, that Starbucks by your house?
Mhm.
And yeah, my treat, and that's easy, easy peasy. All right. So back to fun with forms. So now we've talked about our inspection forms, our general inspection forms. And by the way, if you ever do a vacant land deal, so this is like the vacant land version of an inspection form. It's a feasibility contingency. And it gives the buyer a specified amount of time to determine if the property is gonna suit his intended use. So maybe it's raw land and he wants to, get an idea of how much is it gonna cost to level it, to run utilities in, to clear it, kind of figure all that stuff out. So this is that. But if you do go into a specialized facet of the business, like you have maybe a client you sold a house to calls up and says, I want to buy an apartment building in Bellevue. Well, you need to partner up with somebody who's in commercial. Because if you're going to be doing commercial, you need to belong to the Commercial Brokers Association. That's a whole different website. There are different forms. It's a different process.
Yeah, I actually got commercially certified like right after
Oh,
residential.
wow, that's wonderful.
That's my
Um,
long goal.
Well, good for you.
Thank you.
Another area that people sometimes think they can just do a one-off is short sales. Well,
Mhm.
they can be very complicated, and I always advise people to partner up with somebody, and I said, yeah, you're gonna have to pay the other broker for their time and expertise, but it'll be it's an investment in your education and in your career. And then you'll know at the end of that if you want to continue to do those kinds of transactions, or if you want to refer them out, because for me, I did a couple and then it was like, yeah, I'm referring these out. Same with manufactured homes. I did a
Mhm.
couple and I was like, wow, that was like 3 times the work for a third of the pay. I'm referring those out in the future.
Right.
It wasn't my thing. But you don't know that until you work it. At the beginning, you're like, well, I'm licensed to do all this stuff. I got that, right? So you have to be careful that you're exercising reasonable skill and care. That's part of your agency duties. If you don't have that knowledge or that skill, then you are really violating your agency duties and putting yourself and the firm and possibly your client at risk of, you know, legal action if you don't know what you're doing.
Mhm.
So, okay, enough about feasibility contingency. Let's talk about septic addenda. So this is the basic septic addendum that you're going to, if you have a septic system on the property that your buyer wants to buy. So there are many county-specific forms, and because septic systems are heavily regulated, each county has its own name for the forms, and there are different entities that oversee. Like in King County, it's a King County Environmental. Tacoma, Pierce County, it's Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. It's the nomenclature, the way things are named. They're the same things, they're just named different in different counties, and different governing bodies oversee the regulations of septic systems, because it's considered a matter of public health. And it is, because if there's a problem with a septic system and that you've got waste going into groundwater, possibly, think about all the shellfish farms we've got in this state, all the other kinds of farms. So you've always got to have a septic system, a septic addendum. So the counties that have their own specific forms are King, Mason, Skagit, Thurston, Kitsap, and Pierce. And then there's a general one for any property that's not in any of those counties. But you do want to find your county specific form if it's in one of those counties. And I'll show you. So this is the boilerplate one. Say you were in, I don't know, Snohomish. Then you would use just this one because it doesn't have its own form. This is the King County form, and they call their inspection form an OSS, and here's the health code for King County, and has all the things, the specific names. Also, with King County, this 22U has to be filled out and recorded at closing, and your buyer will owe King County $40 toward the education program for consumers or for homeowners who have septic systems. And escrow can help with this. We used to record these all the time in escrow, along with the closing documents. So along with the deed that transferred ownership from the seller to the buyer. And if the buyer had a lender, we would record the deed of trust, which collateralized the loan to the property. So easily done, but the seller does have to fill this out and it has to be notarized. So they can fill it out, but they can't sign it unless it's in front of a notary. And then that notary needs to notarize it. Fill out this is called the jurat, Jurat, this section that the notary fills out, and then they have to put in their name, and then they would also stamp it with their seal. And that all gets recorded at closing. That's only in King though. Only in King is that 22U. And Pierce has their own as well. So I'm just showing you a couple of the county specific forms here. So the process is, the seller says, hey, as far as I know, everything works on this system. But I will get a septic provider or a septic service provider to come out, look at my system if it hasn't been done within the last year, and see if I needed to get it pumped or if it needs repair in any way. And in Pierce County, you have to have a TPCHD approved vendor to do this O&M, operation and maintenance report. And the seller, this is all available on the TPCHD website, which is very user friendly. And that has to be done within 10 days of mutual. Then the seller has to take that O&M along with an application for report of system status, ARSS, and a fee, and submit all that to Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. Now, many times the septic service provider will, when they come to do the operations and maintenance service visit, they will say to the seller, okay, if you want me to submit my O&M form directly to TPCHD, I can do that for you. If I can build that extra fee into my bill, and you just pay me one thing, and then I will send my O&M along with your application and the fee in, and we'll streamline the process that way. And if you've got somebody who can do that for you, it makes it a lot smoother. So the seller has 10 days to get this done. If they say, oh, we're going to put the house on the market in a couple months, we haven't had the septic tank pump for a couple of years, we better get that done. You can definitely do it early. It lasts for a year. It's good for a year. And I would always try and get my sellers to start the process early when they were going to list. Because if you end up doing this in the spring or the early summer, the busiest parts of the year, it can take at least 2 weeks, probably 2 to 3 weeks to get this done. Because after you've gotten the service provider to come out, evaluate the system, do any repairs, send in the application to the county, well, then you wait for the county to come and do a final inspection. And their final blessing is called a report of system status. And that is what you need by whatever name it is in the county. I think it's an OSS, Operation System Status, in King County. Each county has a little different name, but it's the same thing. It's the county has done the final inspection and says you're good to go, you can close. And that must be obtained prior to closing. And if you are, again, in a busy time and you've got a 30-day escrow and it takes a week to get the service provider out to do their work and generate that report, and then it takes 2 more weeks for Tacoma Pierce County Health Department to come out and do their report, we're already at 3 weeks. We're only a week from closing now. And it turns into a real nail biter. So I guess if you have the listing, try and get it done early. Otherwise, all things, if it's not a super busy season, you can usually get this done in 2 weeks. So once the report of system status is issued, then the seller has to provide it to the seller within 3 days that they get it. Now, in some counties, this report's available on the website, like in Pierce, it's available on Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. It's posted there. But it is still the seller's responsibility to deliver it to the buyer within 3 days. And then, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so let me back up. So the first time frame is the seller has 10 days to get their initial inspection and application done. Then, as soon as the seller gets the report of system status back from the county, they deliver to the buyer in 3 days. Then the seller has 3 days after the buyer's notice, if they disapprove it, to say, oh, we'll fix whatever needs to be fixed. If the seller's already had this done within the last year, then they've just got 10 days with a mutual to deliver those records, past servicing of the system, and an RSS if it's available and still valid within 10 days of mutual. Septic systems are notoriously expensive and time consuming to repair or replace. It might be $10,000 if they have to redo the drain field, that kind of thing. Now, if you've just got like a cracked lid or something, then that's not a big deal. But if there's a major problem, then it's a major expense. So I would not close without that, or without that county blessing, the RSS or the OSS and King or whatever it's called, in whatever, depending on the county you're in. If your buyer does disapprove the report that they get, they can terminate and get the earnest money back. And there's a form for that. It is right here, 90Y. Now, in the rare circumstance that the parties wish to close without getting the county to sign off on their system, you would need to have a hold harmless addendum attached to your contract, signed by all the parties prior to closing, to indemnify yourself and the firm and escrow and everybody and their brother. And I posted that on the Facebook page, but I can always email it too. All you have to do is ask me, and I can send that over. And it can easily, I have it drafted for King and Pierce, but it can easily be customized for another county. I can do that for you very quickly. But that's a rare occasion, and that'd be like, what would be a scenario like that? Well, say an investor buys a tear down, and the septic system is shot, and they're getting a screaming deal, and they're gonna tear down the house and replace the septic system, or maybe hook it up to sewer now, because that's now available. And they're redoing it, everything. So they don't want to fuss around with having the existing 40-year-old septic system repaired, or wait for it to get replaced. They want to do it all with their own subcontractors. So that would be a scenario for that. Okay, if you have a property that's on a well, you definitely want to have a well addendum to make sure that your buyer has protection to ensure that a well has not just adequate amount of water, but a satisfactory quality of water. So this addendum is very similar to our inspection addendum in terms of the structure for the back and forth negotiation between the parties. And again, it's usually 10 days for the seller to give the buyer any documentation they have about the well. And then here's our water quality contingency. And the water, the water sample has to be sent off to a private lab for evaluation. And then there's a quantity contingency to make sure that there's proper water flow to serve the property. And these timeframes are a little bit longer because of the need for getting specialists out to take samples and evaluate and then send them off to the lab to get them analyzed. And then again, there's the same time frame. Sellers, or a similar time frame. Sellers got a 15 days of mutual to either disapprove the inspection and terminate or ask for repairs. And then the seller has 3 days to respond to that request. And then the buyer has 3 days to reply to the seller. I would always, as a buyer's agent, I'd always check this seller box here under paragraph 5. Why not ask the seller to pay for any transfer costs for water rights? Sure. Mr. Seller, you can pay that for my buyer. Thank you. And then if you do have to terminate a transaction based on the fact that the buyer doesn't like the well inspection, here's your well inspection response form. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't get there yet. That's the response form. There is a form to, oh no, this is our one. So we can either approve it. This is just like the inspection form. You can disapprove it, terminate, get your earnest money back. Again, you're going to accompany that with Form 50. Or you can ask for repairs or modifications. And then again, just like what 35 and 35 are, the timeframes for this back and forth are provided for in the well addendum itself. Okay. Now I have a Q&A from the legal hotline about inspections. As a buyer's agent, after delivering a seller 35R asking for repairs to be done, is it okay for the buyer's broker to respond to the listing agent when they call asking for more details surrounding the item we asked to be repaired? It feels wrong to discuss it because in order to answer, I would be discussing my knowledge of what was found on the inspection report. My wall goes up immediately and I want to respond, fill out 35C and I'll tell you about it. Does having a 35C allow me the right to verbally discuss items from the inspection report with the listing agent? I want to be helpful and specific. And some agents say it's okay. But some agents say verbalizing anything from the inspection report is jeopardizing the earnest money. What do you think?
It's a good one. I would say that you don't have to disclose the specifics.
Well, you certainly can't in writing without getting that 35C, that consent form from the seller, or you waive your buyer's contingency. But here's the answer from the hotline attorney. Buyer broker does not jeopardize buyer's inspection contingency by engaging in oral conversation with listing broker regarding buyer's repair requests. There is no requirement for seller to consent to receive some or all of buyer's inspection report before buyer broker responds verbally to questions posed by the listing broker. It's important to note these conversations should be oral only, so no text, no emails. If listing broker asks the buyer broker to send some portion of the inspection report to substantiate or back up or, prove or add detail to their verbal conversation, then the seller must consent to receive the report or portions of the report before the buyer broker sends any portion of that report. So yes, you can talk to the other broker about it. You have to be kind of careful about what you say, but there's no prohibition about talking about it. But having said that, you're not required to. But it's kind of a judgment call on your part as to what's going to move the transaction forward.
So you
What's in the
said,
best interest of my buyer?
right. You said the buyer broker can't send the report until the seller has agreed, the seller's broker has agreed to the things that are needing repair.
No. No, you can't send the inspection report or any portion of the inspection report or the inspector's recommendation for further inspections, like
Okay.
specialists,
Further,
unless the seller has sent over, the listing agent has sent over a seller signed consent form. And here's the consent form again.
okay.
That 35C, you've got to have that before you send any of the inspection documentation.
Okay.
If you do provide any of that without getting this in your file, then your buyer's contingency is over, it's gone, it's waived. And right when they changed this process, which was a year ago in July, I had a very experienced broker, I won't tell you who it is, who sent over their 35R along with the part of the inspection report that backed up their request, right? That had the details for the repair that the buyer was requesting. Because, as I told you earlier, years ago, that's how we did it. That was like, here's the support, here's what the inspector said. This is why I'm asking for this repair, is because the inspector said this, and here's what he said, and here are the pictures. Well, that changed. We can't do that anymore unless we've got the seller's written permission. But the new form came in and he was in the middle of a transaction. He just sent it out as usual. And he got an email back from the listing agent that said, our listing is now pending and, your inspection contingency is waived. And it,
Oh,
and it was, and it was.
yeah.
So fortunately, in that case, if you want to know the end of the story, there was another issue of disclosure, and it was a misrepresentation of a material fact. So they had said in the listing that the property was approved for 4 bedrooms, and it's a septic, had a septic system. So it was built to serve a 3-bedroom house, but they had put in the listing that it would serve a 4-bedroom house. And the house had subsequently been remodeled. I don't know, they could turn a bonus room into another bedroom or something. Anyway, it wasn't approved for 4 bedrooms. So based on that inaccurate material fact, they were able to exit the transaction and get their earnest money. So that was really, really lucky.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have their inspection contingency anymore.
Yeah. Crazy.
And okay, I'll give one more example and then we'll call it a day, or one more Q&A. Okay. So, and this is one that I actually sent into the legal hotline last year. The buyer did a full inspection and requested a repair of the GFCI, the ground fault circuit interrupter outlets in their inspection response form 35R. The seller agreed to do it. Upon completion of the job, the electrician who was doing the work recommended replacing the electrical panel as it is old. We represented the seller in this case. The seller felt that the electric panel was fine because the system is working, it's functioning, but the listing broker was very concerned that possible future problems will come back to haunt him if he does not disclose this recommendation to the selling broker and buyer. Should seller consult an attorney? The answer is, well, I can't tell you what's required of you in this situation.
Not matter anyways because it wasn't found in the initial report.
It wasn't what?
It wasn't mentioned in
No, no, it was not mentioned on the inspection report. It just that there were some GFCI outlets that weren't working, so that they were getting fixed, and then the electrician said, "Oh, this is really old. It should be replaced." So then our broker, who is there with the repairman, along with the seller, he got very concerned about that later. This could be a safety issue. What if that's something do we need to tell the buyer about it, So that's the question. What's our obligation to disclose the recommendation of a contractor to make further improvements to the property? So if we know about an existing material fact that's not, readily apparent to another party, that would adversely affect the physical condition or the title to the property, then we are required to disclose it. It's always a conversation with the seller, though, So a material fact is defined as information that substantially adversely affects the value of a property or a party's ability to perform its obligations in a real estate transaction, or defeat the purpose of the transaction. And there are lots of things that are not material facts that might turn people off, like, was it the site of a crime, a burglary, or another violent crime? Was there
right.
color religious activity? Was there illegal drug activity? Those things are not material facts that we have to disclose. So having said that, it really, if it gets too gnarly, it's going to be a matter of the seller talking to their own legal counsel to determine whether or not they have to disclose a particular issue. So
And
what
did they
Yeah.
have to, so they were liable to disclose it, but not necessarily to repair it since it wasn't found in the initial report?
Well, we did disclose what this electrician had said when they were repairing the GFCIs, but the buyer had already had his own inspection and he felt comfortable, he just, they didn't want to do a further inspection. They said, we've had our inspection, we've got the results. We're gonna re-inspect the GFCIs, make sure they're working, and so noted. This isn't gonna affect our decision to buy the property, and we're not gonna ask for the whole panel to get replaced because it's working fine, and our inspector thought it was fine. Remember when we were talking earlier about the liability that's incurred or, by a seller if they receive an inspection report and then they have constructive knowledge of the material defect. And the fact that inspection, does contain some opinion of the inspector of that property on a given day. So this electrician who is replacing the GFCIs, that was his opinion of the property on a given day. It didn't agree with the buyer's inspector, what the buyer's inspector said about it. So if you ever get into a situation where there's something that you're wondering if it should be disclosed or not, you need to call me and we will work it out. Because it's every single time I've had this issue come up, the variables are so different in the transaction, that you have to evaluate it just on a case-by-case basis.
Mhm.
And we do have an attorney that I can consult if we get into a legal gray area to get some advice on how to proceed. So that's a resource for us as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, now I think I do have one more meme. Oh, here we go. It's closing day. Woohoo! That's a good feeling when you wake up and, oh my gosh, this is gonna be a great day. The culmination of all your hard work.
Hopefully, right?
And a payday.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing as well. No, I'm so glad you came to class today and that, I hope you
Thank you.
learned some good stuff and,
Yeah, and I did want to let you know I have a document to send your way,
okay,
a redo of a referral fee agreement
sure.
from Arizona for
No,
my outstanding transactions. We haven't gotten anything pending yet. Buyers are very wishy-washy on the fence about what they want to do. So I just wanted to get the referral fee agreement updated and
sure.
buyer's agreement and all of that. So
Well,
those will be coming
send
your
it over.
yeah. Perfect. Alrighty.
Hey, Jessica, take care.
You too. Thank you so much.
Bye. You got it. Bye-bye.